Hello and welcome to English Academy. Today we'll be studying this chapter, Nelson Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom, taken from First Flight book for class 10. Now in this chapter, we read the story of Nelson Mandela, who was a freedom fighter of South Africa. He wrote his autobiography, he wrote the story of his life, and the title of his autobiography is Long Walk to Freedom. So this chapter is a part from his autobiography. Now, why does he say a long walk to freedom? He does not mean that figuratively he had to walk a long distance to take freedom, but he means to say that it was a very long time. He spent around 27 to 30 years in prison also in order to get freedom for his country. And he also had a very major role in gaining freedom and then gaining freedom from racial discrimination known as apartheid, which was prevalent in South Africa. It was a discrimination on the basis of the color of the skin. So here in this chapter, he is basically first of all telling us about that day when the first elected government was established in South Africa and he was elected as the president of that government, and then what all led to that day, what kind of struggles the countrymen had to face in order to gain freedom. Let us read the chapter and we'll discuss it too. Nelson Mandela served prison for 27 years for the abolition of apartheid, a racial discrimination on the basis of the color of the skin, came to be known as the father of the nation in South Africa. So this is what I just told you, that he was in prison for 27 years. Somewhere it is written 30 years also, so we are not very confirmed about that. So I said 27 to 30 years. And it was against the racial discrimination on the basis of the color of the skin. So blacks were discriminated against the whites, and this was known as apartheid. And then as he had struggled so much, he came to be known as the father of the nation. Now the story starts. 10th May dawned bright and clear. For the past few days, I had been pleasantly besieged by dignitaries and world leaders who were coming to pay their respects before the inauguration. Besieged means to be surrounded closely by someone. So this is the date 10th of May 1994. This is the day when South Africa's first government, elected government, did the swearing in. And Nelson Mandela was the elected president of South Africa. So world leaders and dignitary means the important politicians from those countries, the leaders. They all were in South Africa and they all had gathered there and they were congratulating Nelson Mandela before the ceremony started. The inauguration would be the largest gathering ever of international leaders on the South African soil. So before this day, never in the history of South Africa had so many world leaders gathered there. The ceremonies took place in the lovely sandstone amphitheatre formed by the Union buildings in Pretoria. So Pretoria is a city in South Africa, and over there is a sandstone amphitheatre which is a part of Union buildings, and over there the ceremony took place. Amphitheatre is an open air theatre. Then he says, for decades this had been the seat of white supremacy, and now it was the site of a rainbow gathering of different colors and nations for the installation of South Africa's first democratic non-racial government. So he says that for many years, decades, almost a century, the whites used to rule from this place, from the Union buildings. But now that day, it was a gathering of rainbow colors because people all of different color skin were there. All the world leaders were present there. So he says it was a rainbow gathering because people from different nations had gathered there to see, to witness the first democratic non-racial government of South Africa. Democratic means chosen by the people, and non-racial means there was no discrimination on the basis of color. On that lovely autumn day, I was accompanied by my daughter Zenani. On the podium, Mr. de Klerk was first sworn in as second deputy president, then Thabo Mbeki was sworn in as first deputy president. Podium is the stage. So he says on that lovely autumn day, autumn here does not refer to the season, but autumn means an auspicious day. So that day he was accompanied by his daughter Zenani, as you can see here in this image. And on the stage, first of all, Mr. de Klerk was sworn in as the second deputy president of South Africa, and then Thabo Mbeki was sworn in as the first deputy president. So we see that two deputy presidents were sworn in. One was a white and one was a black, in order to show that the government was non-racial. When it was my turn, I pledged to obey and uphold the constitution and to devote myself to the well-being of the republic and its people. So when Nelson Mandela took the oath, he pledged that he would obey the constitution and he would devote himself for the well-being of the people of South Africa. To the assembled guests and the watching world, I said, today all of us do, by our presence here, confer glory and hope to newborn liberty. Confer means give, and newborn liberty here means freedom. So in his speech, he said to all the guests who were there and all the people who must be watching the ceremony through any live telecast, he said that all of us are conferring, means giving, glory and hope to freedom. So he's saying that we all are acknowledging that freedom of a person is the utmost important thing. Out of the experience of an extraordinary human disaster that lasted too long must be born a society of which all humanity will be proud. So he says that the humans living in South Africa experienced a lot of disaster, a lot of torture, and they experienced it for a very long time. So he says that whenever you experience such kind of disaster for a very long time, then a great deal of humanity is result of that. He wants to say that if a disaster prolonged for a very long time and people suffer from that, they become very, very, very human. We, who were outlaws not so long ago, have today been given the rare privilege to be host to the nations of the world on our own soil. Outlaws here refers to those countries which had severed diplomatic relations with South Africa due to the practice of apartheid. So he wants to say that a few years ago, all these countries were not friendly with South Africa because apartheid, racial discrimination was practiced there. But now on that day, they had made friendly relations. That is why the world leaders were present in South Africa on that day. Then he says, we thank all of our distinguished international guests for having come to take possession with the people of our country of what is, after all, a common victory for justice, for peace, for human dignity. Human dignity means respect. So he is thanking all the international guests, all the world leaders for being there and giving their acceptance to the residents of South Africa who were victorious against injustice, against disturbance, and against indignity. So they had a fight. They fought against those people who oppressed them, and now they were victorious. And the presence of the world leaders was supporting them, and it was showing that yes, we are with you. We have at last achieved our political emancipation. Political emancipation means freedom from restriction, or we can say upliftment. So he says that yes, today our country is politically free. We can take our own decisions which are favorable for us. We pledge ourselves to liberate all our people from the continuing bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender, and other discrimination. Deprivation means state of not having one's rightful benefits, and discrimination means to be treated differently. So he says that today we are taking this oath that we will free all the people of South Africa from any type of discrimination, from any type of poverty. They will not be deprived of any benefits. They will not suffer. There will be no kind of discrimination in the country. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another. The sun shall never set on so glorious a human achievement. Let freedom reign. God bless Africa. So he says that now in the future, South Africa will never be oppressed by another ruler, and the sun shall never set on our country because we have done a big achievement. And he says that we should allow freedom to rule our people. So he wants all the people to be free. A few moments later, we all lifted our eyes in awe as a spectacular array of South African jets, helicopters, and troop carriers rode in perfect formation over the Union buildings. Array is an impressive display, and awe means astonishment. So they saw in the sky there was an aerial display of South African jets, helicopters, and troop carriers, and they were doing a performance in the sky. It was not only a display of pinpoint precision and military force, but a demonstration of the military's loyalty to democracy, to a new government that had been freely and fairly elected. Precision means accuracy. So he says that it was not only that they were displaying their skills in flying, but they were also showing that they are loyal to South Africa. They are loyal to the fact that today they had an elected government which had been elected freely and fairly. Only moments before, the highest generals of the South African Defence Force and Police, their chests bedecked with ribbons and medals from days gone by, saluted me and pledged their loyalty. Pledged means promised, and bedecked means they were decorated. So he says that only a few moments before this aerial display of jets, the highest generals, the officials of the South African Defence Forces and Police Forces, who had a lot of medals on their uniform, were saluting Nelson Mandela, and they also promised that they would be loyal towards the country. I was not unmindful of the fact that not so many years before they would not have saluted but arrested me. Unmindful means conscious or aware of. So he wants to say that when the whites were ruling South Africa at that time, obviously the police and the defense forces will do as instructed by the government. So they would have arrested Nelson Mandela for being anti-government, for doing some activities which were against the government. And so he says that a few years ago they would have arrested me instead of saluting me. Finally, a chevron of Impala jets left a smoke trail of the black, red, green, blue and gold of the new South African flag. Chevron is a zigzag pattern like this. So he says that these jets were flying in this zigzag shape and they left a smoke of different colors. And these colors represented the colors of the South African flag. The day was symbolized for me by the playing of our two national anthems and the vision of whites singing Soki Skilil, I Africa, and black singing Die Stem, the old anthem of the republics. So that day they played two national anthems. One was the national anthems of the white skin colored and the second was the national anthem of the black colored skin people. Although that day neither group knew the lyrics of the anthem they once despised, they would soon know the words by heart. They had a very low opinion of. Despised means that once they hated this. So he says that neither group knew the lyrics of the national anthem of the other group, but because they used to hate them. But he says that now, gradually with the passage of time, they would also learn the national anthems of the other colored skin people because now they were all one. Then further he says, on the day of the inauguration, I was overwhelmed with a sense of history. Overwhelmed means too full of emotions. So he says that on this day, when I was taking the oath as the president, I was thinking of our country's history, of the past. In the first decade of the 20th century, a few years after the bitter Anglo-Boer War and before my own birth, the white-skinned people of South Africa patched up their differences and erected a system of racial domination against the dark-skinned people of their own land. So he says that before he was even born, in the first decade of the 20th century, that means in the 1900s, a few years after the Anglo-Boer War, the white-skinned people of South Africa, they came together and they started racial domination over the black-skinned people. The structure they created formed the basis of one of the harshest, most inhuman societies the world has ever known. So the structure, that is the policy of apartheid, was one of the most harsh, most inhuman society of the world. Now in the last decade of the 20th century and my own 8th decade as a man, that system has been overturned forever and replaced by one that recognizes the rights and freedoms of all people regardless of the color of their skin. So now he says that now I'm in the last decade of the 20th century, means in the 1990s, and he is in his 80s. And see, he says that now we have overturned this system and now all the people are free regardless of this color of their skin. That day has come about through the unimaginable sacrifices of thousands of my people, people whose suffering and courage can never be counted or repaid. I felt that day, as I have on so many other days, that I was simply the sum of all those African patriots who had gone before me. Patriots are the freedom fighters of the country, or those people who love their country. So he says that that day has come after various innumerable sacrifices. Thousands of people who gave up their lives, who were very courageous, and now many of those people are not even alive to see this day when the first elected government is swearing in. That long and noble line ended and now began again with me. I was pained that I was not able to thank them and that they were not able to see what their sacrifices had wrought. Wrought means done or achieved. So he says that those noble people are not alive, and he says that I was feeling a lot of pain that I could not thank them because this day was possible because of their efforts and their sacrifices. The policy of apartheid created a deep and lasting wound in my country and my people. All of us will spend many years, if not generations, recovering from that profound. Profound means deep and strong. So he says that the policy of apartheid has created a lot of wounds, means not physical wounds, but emotional wounds. And those wounds will take a lot of time to heal. And he says that all of us will spend many years in order to recover from that injury. But the decades of oppression and brutality had another unintended effect, and that was that it produced the Oliver Tambos, the Walter Sislers, the Chief Luthulus, the Yusuf Dados, the Bram Fishers, the Robert Sobequis of our time. Men of such extraordinary courage, wisdom, and generosity that their like may never be known again. So he says that those years of oppression and brutality have made many strong and powerful people, and he's naming those powerful freedom fighters of South Africa who even gave up their life in order to gain freedom of their people. And he says that such extraordinary people who had a lot of courage, wisdom, and generosity, such people are not very common, and he says that never again would such people will be born on this earth. Perhaps it requires such depths of oppression to create such heights of character. So, this statement is very important and it can be asked as a question also. He means to say that whenever a person is oppressed, whenever someone is exploited to a great extent, the oppressed person is treated in a harsh way, and that oppression makes him very strong and gives him a lot of good qualities, and his character reaches the peak. It becomes very strong. So that is what Mandela wants to say, that depths of oppression creates heights of character. My country is rich in the minerals and gems that lie beneath the soil, but I have always known that its greatest wealth is the people, finer and truer than the purest diamonds. So he says that South Africa is known for the rich diamonds that it produces, but he says that the true wealth of my country is the fine and true people that are there, whose character is so strong. They are more precious than these diamonds. It is from these comrades in the struggle that I learned the meaning of courage. Time and again, I have seen men and women risk and give their lives for an idea. So he says that these comrades, means these companions in the struggle, taught me the meaning of courage. And he says that many times I have seen that they even risk their life to fulfill the idea for which they are struggling and fighting. I have seen men stand up to attacks and torture without breaking, showing a strength and resilience that defies the imagination. So, showing a strength and resilience means they show the ability to deal with hardship and recover from its effects. He says that these men were so strong that if they were tortured also, they would not break. They had so much strength and they would again come back to their normal mentality even after such a lot of torture. So he says that this is against my imagination. I cannot imagine that such sort of people, such sort of characters can actually exist. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear but the triumph over it. Triumph means victory. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. So he says that I learned that courage does not mean that you do not have fear, but courage means that you have overcome that fear, you have attained victory over that fear. And then he says that the person who is brave is not the person who does not feel afraid, but he is the person who did feel afraid, and then he conquered that fear and he became fearless. Then he says, no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. So here he says that no person is born hating, because this quality of hatred, we are not born with it. We are born with the quality of love, care, compassion. And he says that we are taught to hate the other person. So he says that if we make ourselves to love others, that is more natural and we should do that. Man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden but never extinguished. So he says that if a person is good, that is like a flame which can be hidden but you cannot extinguish it, because it will always burn, it will always be lighted up inside that man. Even in the grimmest times in prison, when my comrades and I were pushed to our limits, I would see a glimmer of humanity in one of the guards, perhaps just for a second, but it was enough to reassure me and keep me going. Pushed to our limits means we were pushed to the last point of our ability to bear pain, and grimmest means toughest. He says that even in the prison, when I faced the toughest times, when my companions and I, we were pushed to our limits, means we were on the edge that we could now die. That time also I saw that the guards who were against us, they had some kind of humanity in their eyes, and that slight humanity, that gave him the purpose to live, because it gave him reassurance that yes, humanity is still there in the world. In life, every man has twin obligations to his family, to his parents, to his wife and children, and he has an obligation to his people, his community, his country. So here Mandela is saying that every man has two obligations. One is towards his family and the other is towards his country. In a civil and human society, each man is able to fulfill those obligations according to his own inclinations and abilities. But in a country like South Africa, it was almost impossible for a man of my birth and color to fulfill both of these obligations. Inclinations means natural behavior. So he says that in any civil society, in any human area, every man is able to fulfill both these obligations. But he says that in the country of South Africa, where they were maltreated due to the practice of apartheid, it was not possible for a man of my birth and color, means for a man who was born in South Africa and whose skin was black, to fulfill both these obligations towards the family and towards the country. In South Africa, a man of color who attempted to live as a human being was punished and isolated. In South Africa, a man who tried to fulfill his duty to his people was inevitably ripped from his family and his home and was forced to live a life apart, a twilight existence of secrecy and rebellion. Inevitably means unavoidably. Twilight is the time when day turns to night, which is a very, very short while, and rebellion means revolt. So here Mandela is saying that in a country like South Africa, a man whose skin is colored, means it is not white. He wants to live a life and he wants to fulfill both his obligations, but that is not possible, because he will be punished and he will be put in isolation, means he will be secluded from other people. When he tried to fulfill his duty towards his country, he was separated from his family and he was forced to live in a jail. He was put into a prison, and thus when he was released from prison, he had to live alone, separate and apart from his family. I did not in the beginning choose to place my people above my family, but in attempting to serve my people, I found that I was prevented from fulfilling my obligations as a son, a brother, a father, and a husband. Now, Nelson Mandela had a family, but when he struggled for the country, he was separated from his family. And then, when he was again released from the prison, he realized that he could not fulfill both the obligations. And so, he was not able to fulfill his obligations towards his family, the duty of being a son, a brother, a father, and a husband. I was not born with a hunger to be free. I was born free, free in every way that I could know. He says that when I was born, it was not that I was hungry for freedom, but I was free. And in every way, I was free that I knew. Free to run in the fields near my mother's hut, free to swim in the clear stream that ran through my village, free to roast mealies under the stars and ride the broad backs of slow moving bulls. So he is here listing down a few kinds of freedom, a few activities which he could do whenever he felt like. And so he felt that he was free. As long as I obeyed my father and abided by the customs of my tribe, I was not troubled by the laws of man or God. Abided means followed, obeyed. So he says that as long as I followed my father, I obeyed his orders, and I was within the customs of my tribe, I did not have any trouble because I was not going against any law. It was only when I began to learn that my boyhood freedom was an illusion, when I discovered as a young man that my freedom had already been taken from me, that I began to hunger for it. Here, illusion means something that appears to be real but is not. So he says that when I grew up, I came to know that as a boy, I used to enjoy, I used to feel that I am free, but that was an illusion. That was not true. Because when he grew up, he realized that he was not absolutely free. At first, as a student, I wanted freedom only for myself, the transitory freedom of being able to stay out at night, read what I pleased, and go where I chose. Transitory means not permanent, that is temporary. So he says that when he was a student, he wanted freedom only for himself. That means whenever he wants to stay out at night, he can. Whenever he wants to read something, he can do that and go wherever he wants to go. Later, as a young man in Johannesburg, I yearned for the basic and honorable freedoms of achieving my potential, of earning my keep, of marrying and having a family, the freedom not to be obstructed in a lawful life. Now, here, yearned means having a strong desire for something. So he says that when I was young, I was a young man, I was living in Johannesburg. That time I wanted freedom of achieving my potential, means achieving whatever I can achieve, of earning whatever I deserve, of marrying someone whom I want to marry, of having a family of my own. And he says that as long as I'm not doing something which is against the law, I should not be obstructed by anyone and I should be allowed to live freely. But then I slowly saw that not only was I not free, but my brothers and sisters were not free. I saw that it was not just my freedom that was curtailed, but the freedom of everyone who looked like I did. Curtailed means reduced. So gradually he realized that it was not only he who could not live life as per what he wished to, but it was all the people who were black skinned. They were curtailed, means their freedom was reduced. They could not live freely. That is when I joined the African National Congress, and that is when the hunger for my own freedom became the greatest hunger for the freedom of my people. So that was the time when he joined African National Congress. He joined the freedom struggle of South Africa, and he became hungry for freedom of his country. It was this desire for the freedom of my people to live their lives with dignity and self-respect that animated my life, that transformed a frightened young man into a bold one, that drove a law-abiding attorney to become a criminal, that turned a family-loving husband into a man without a home, that forced a life-loving man to live like a monk. Monk is a saint who has given up worldly pleasures. So he says that this desire of freedom brought a lot of change in Mandela's life. He was a frightened young man, but now he became bold. He was fighting for his rights. He was a law abiding man. he was an attorney, that means a lawyer, but now he was termed as a criminal because he was going against the laws of the country. But what he was doing, he was just asking for his freedom, for his rights. And the man who was a family loving husband, he became a man without a home because he had to give up on his family in order to fight for his country's freedom. And a man who loved life, he had to give up on life and he had to live the life of a monk. So such huge sacrifices he had to make. I am no more virtuous or self-sacrificing than the next man, but I found that I could not even enjoy the poor and limited freedoms I was allowed when I knew my people were not free. So he says that it is not that I have a lot of virtues, I have a lot of good qualities, or I am a very self-sacrificing man. But when I realized that I was not free, people like me were not free, I gave up all those things and I changed myself. Freedom is indispensable. The chains on any one of my people were the chains on all of them. The chains on all of my people were the chains on me. He says freedom is indivisible, means we cannot divide freedom, we cannot curtail freedom. If any people of my people, means any of my countrymen are bound by chains, they are not free, it is like I am also bound, I am also not free. I knew that the oppressor must be liberated just as surely the oppressed. A man who takes away another man's freedom is a prisoner of hatred. He is locked behind the bars of prejudice and narrow-mindedness. Prejudice is a strong dislike without any good reason. So he is saying that whenever a person exploits another person, the person who is exploiting, that is the exploiter, is a victim of hatred because he has some prejudices in his mind, he has dislike for other people, that is why he is exploiting them. And he says that they are victims of prejudice and narrow-mindedness. Then he says, I am not truly free if I am taking away someone else's freedom, just as surely as I am not free when my freedom is taken from me. The oppressed and the oppressor alike are robbed of their humanity. So he says that as the person who is being oppressed, who is being exploited, he is not free. Similarly, the person who is exploiting is also not free. Both of them are being inhuman. One is being exploited and the other is exploiting. So with this, we come to an end of this session. We have read this very interesting and inspiring chapter, Nelson Mandela, Long Walk of Freedom, where Nelson Mandela has shared his views about freedom, exploitation, oppression, hatred, and love. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, please give us a thumbs up, share this video with your friends, and for more such videos, subscribe to English Academy.